We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You are listening to The Underground Marketing Conspiracy, a secret ritual where entrepreneurs acquire highly classified and confidential business knowledge that the top 1% of income earners don't want you to know. And now, your host, Maddie Milligan.
What is up, my fellow conspirator and conspirators? It is, of course, none other than I, your boy, Maddie Milligan, the beast of Bay Street. And this, of course, is another episode of The Underground Marketing Conspiracy. Woo! All right, guys. Now listen, do you consider yourself an expert? Maybe you're an agency owner. Maybe you're struggling right now to find new clients, to really grow and scale your business. I really recommend you listen closely because I've invited an awesome guest on today's episode, all right? I'm always looking for new ideas and tactics and strategies when it comes to sales and marketing and business and entrepreneurship. And the person I've invited today, I find that his ideas are original. I've never heard of them before. So I felt it was my duty and my obligation to invite him on the show, share really what's the future of marketing, in my opinion, what's going to be happening in 2020 and beyond. So the person I've invited today, he's the founder of Conley Strategic, but he is also an investor and an advisor for a company called Contractor Dynamics, which we'll talk about in a minute. So without further ado, I want everyone to give a warm Underground Marketing Conspiracy welcome to my guest today, Mr. Tim Conley. Tim, thank you so much for showing up today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Maddie.
Awesome.
Well, so I gotta say something.
Yeah.
Is this like a Pearl Jam cover band starting here? Like
I think it is with our long hair.
The long hairs.
I mean, I was gonna shave, and I'm like, but I'm like, I think this would be better. We both have our beards. I think my hair is slightly longer, but you stick.
I got mine cut like 2 months ago.
All right, too bad. All right, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think we can start a band at some point. All right, maybe we can call it, something involving marketing and sales, some cool buzzword. So let's talk about marketing for a second. Like, you don't look like someone who's the typical marketer or even like necessarily a businessman, but you have all these awesome ideas. So how did you really get into marketing, first of all? Like, were you always were you interested in this originally?
No, I was a designer. I went to school, architecture school, and then as I was in architecture school, the internet kicked off. And I started learning how to code, and I just loved that whole idea. And I knew that I was at a point where the world was changing. Like, everything was changing after the internet just really kicked off. So I dropped out of architecture school and decided I'm going to do a startup. And because back then, all the guys my age in their early 20s, we were all getting rich off of writing a business plan on a napkin. And so that's what I was going to do. And unfortunately, I failed terribly. And that failure is what kicked me off on learning marketing. I realized I needed to learn how to get a customer. Mm-hmm. That was why my startup failed, is I didn't know how to get a customer. I could code, I could make websites, I could do graphics, I could do all that stuff, but I didn't know how to get customers. And so that's what I started, was a journey on learning how to get customers. And then that led me into consulting, doing a marketing agency, becoming a ad copywriter, all that stuff. Like, it was all accidental. It was not ever purposeful.
Nice. I think, honestly, I was kind of the same way. I didn't really start thinking about that as a young man, being like, I'm going to be into sales and marketing. I think a lot of people, especially this day and age, they don't really have that plan. They're just kind of like, all right, you know what, like, I'm going to get into this eventually. And yeah. So one thing I like about you is that from what the content I've seen of yours, you talk a lot about how agencies should be selling their thinking. And I thought that was interesting because I'm like, what? Sell your thinking? Like, how is that even possible? And you talk a lot about selling the strategy first, right? So
right.
How does that work exactly when it comes to selling your thinking?
Well, let's go back a little bit, because
okay,
what is expertise? That's what we sell. That's what you sell as a copywriter. You're not selling the act of writing words. Yep. You're selling the thoughts that go behind that. And that's intellectual property. Mm-hmm. So if we focus on intellectual property as what we're actually selling, and we're transferring that intellect from one entity to another entity, that's all we're doing. Software does this. Products do this. Well, so do services. So do marketing services. So do copywriting. All those things, they're a transfer of intellectual property from one entity to another one. So if we start there, that is what is actually valuable. That's the thing that is of value, not the act of doing it. But everybody sells the act of doing it and not the actual intellect behind it.
Yep, exactly. Everyone's selling the labor, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that with anything, right? Whether someone's a designer, whether they're a copywriter, whether they do any kind of media buying like Facebook ads or Google ads. I mean, it's all about that, right? You sit down with people, they come to you, they're like, I want you to do this thing. And you're like, all right, like I need to take a step back first and understand, really what you want and what the results and goals you are. All right. Now with me, one of the biggest problems I always had originally was like, when I'm first starting out, I'm like, okay, how do I price these services? And I know so many people when they're first starting out, it's like the biggest thing. It's like people don't want to talk about it a lot of the time because they're like scared to death of how much they're going to charge. Am I going to undercharge? And they're like, oh, now there's scope creep. So how do you determine your pricing? And if you're just starting out, where would you start with pricing your first offer?
Okay. It's really tough pricing that first offer, because what we all do is actually like reach up into the air and just pull a number out. Like it's just like, and that's our price. And if we admit that, if we admit the fact that we're just making it up, we don't actually have any real basis for that number. And most of it is on our self-worth. We pick a number based upon what we feel is a good number for us, not what's a good number for the client, but what's good for us because of our own self-worth issues. So people with a high self-worth, people who have gotten confidence and learned skills, they come right into freelancing or starting their own business, and they start at the top of the market. I've met, in the years I've been doing this, I've met people who were in the corporate space doing marketing, advertising, and then started their own thing and just went right to the corporate world. That's who they knew. And they immediately were charging high 6 figures and low 7 figures for their work. And I've watched other people start, and they come in and they start at the low 3 figures.
Yep.
Right. So how did it's all based on our own self-worth.
Yep.
With that said, like if you start looking at the numbers that you're picking, how did you come up with them? Most likely you looked around at people that you felt were like you, not the competitors that you aspired to be, but the ones that were that you felt you were like, and you looked at, well, what are they charging? And you found, oh, some are charging $3,000 a month, or some are charging $30,000 for a project. Others are charging $10,000 for a project. So I'm just going to pick, I don't know, maybe 15,000 or 20,000, somewhere in the middle. And that's how most people pick their number, not having a real conversation with their client. And that's where value-based pricing comes in. If you can sit down and what I call is stay in strategy instead of jumping to services. If you can stay in strategy longer, you can go have a conversation with your prospect. If you're not trying to close that prospect, but trying to understand the prospect, you can find out what the real value is. And then they can gain trust in you, and they can tell you what their real budget is, which no prospect tells you what their real budget is.
They never, ever tell you what their budget is, ever. It's always
right.
This random number they've pulled out of midair. And one thing I do on a lot of my calls is I'll be like, all right, so like, what's your budget? And they'll be like, like, I don't know. And then they'll be like, okay, is it like 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, like 50? Like, what are we talking? And I kind of try and pivot it down. And even whatever number, that's never their budget in the end. They never tell you the truth. So I like that. It's like a good way to just, I guess, build their trust and get them comfortable with, right? Like, I hate to use this phrase, but it's like, before they jump into bed with you, it gives them a chance to really, see what you're about, see if you know what you're talking about, right?
Right. And so if you get comfortable with the idea that I am not going to close a prospect in that first conversation. You may still do it. And if you have a good conversation, you might actually do it and close at a higher price point. Because then the prospect says, this person actually understands me. And if they feel understood, then they're going to want to work with you. Because most everyone else that they're speaking to, and they are speaking to other people, you're not their only vendor they're talking to. They're talking to other people, and those people are just trying to sell them and may even just throw out a price right up front. They just throw one out instead of actually taking the time to get to know the client and understand what they're going through and what the real value of success is to them. And a lot of times it's not just monetary. There's other ways of success that they're after, and they may be more willing to pay for an esoteric success, an intangible success, like being well known versus results. You know, we all think as marketers, we've got to get them results. And yes, you do, but they may actually want a result that's not an ROI. They may want a result that makes them well known in their community. And I've had clients that was their main goal. They came to us and they wanted to be known as a community that supported Louisiana State University, and that they were a part of New Orleans, like they were a part of Louisiana. They were a Southern company, and that's what they wanted their marketing to be about, not getting more customers. That's what they wanted. So what's the value of that? Well, to them, it was worth a lot of money, right? So if you really understand your client, you can find a way to price that gets you what you're worth to the client. Maybe not what you're worth to yourself, but worth to the client.
That's very interesting. I think this leads into the next thing I'm talking about based on our conversation so far. Because it's like, all right, we have our first client. We're doing the strategy. All right, now they become a client. All right. One of the sacred cows of the business world is like SOPs, right? Standard operating procedures. In a lot of cases, I found that they're like very rigid and they don't work for every single client that you have, right? So I think you have an interesting perspective on SOPs that I've really never heard anyone. So why don't you talk a little bit more about what you really think about SOPs?
SOPs are BS. I'm like the only one who says this, because I've worked with a lot of companies, and if you're in the early stages of a business, there's absolutely no reason to have an SOP. Because an SOP means it's standard operating. Yep. Right? It's in the name. That means it doesn't change.
Every business.
If you're in the beginning parts of a business, everything you do changes within days, not months, days. From the first time you tried it, you did it with one client and it kind of worked. So you did it again on the second client. And then by the third or fourth client, well, it's even different from that. And so what I see a lot of early stage companies doing is that they slow their own growth by trying to systemize things that aren't a system yet. And because they just hear everybody talking about this mantra of have an SOP. And so they decide I'm going to start systemizing before they've actually figured out what the actual system is. And that slows growth. But if you are past those early stages, if you're in the millions of dollars in revenue, if you're under millions of dollars in revenue and your goal is to get there, then you don't systemize until you're in the millions. Yep. If you're intending to stay a small company, a freelancer or something like that, and you just want to hit $500,000 a year and be a well-paid freelancer, well, then you'll get out of the early stages probably by the time you hit $200,000 a year. So then you could start systemizing. So when I say early stages, it's not about the dollar figure. It's about what your aspirational goals are. So if you don't want to get big, well, then you systemize at a lower dollar figure. If you want to get really big, you want to get really successful, you systemize at a later stage.
Okay, that's really interesting. I've actually never heard many people talk about that, and I'm a huge reader. I've read tons of books. People are always like, okay, what's a good book for me to read? And a lot of the books that I've read recently have been through recommendations from you on some of your YouTube videos, and I see some of them in the background there, and I'm like, what's that one? And I'll like zoom in.
Yeah, that's a lot of people do that.
Yeah. So like with you, if there were one or maybe two books that you think every entrepreneur must read, what would those be?
Oh gosh, there's so many, and the real answer is dependent upon what the person's trying to achieve, not based upon what I wanted to achieve and what I like to read. But I do have one right up here, up on my shelf, Getting Everything You Can Out of All You've Got by Jay Abraham. That's a great book for anyone, whether you're successful or just getting started. It's one of my favorite books. I give it out as gifts. I read it every so many years. I go back and reread it. That one's a fantastic book. But then if you really want to get good at business, you've got to go to the real business thinkers, not the internet marketers or just marketers in general. I tell people, stay away from that stuff.
Yep.
Because they've got marketers are all about hype, about the sizzle,
behind a lot of stuff that they talk about.
And definitely that, right? And so there's not a lot of stake behind their sizzle.
Exactly.
So go to things like Dr. Ichak Adizes. He's got some great work on how to run a company, how to be a CEO. Go old school, Peter Drucker. Read anything by Peter Drucker. Do that if you want to learn about running a company. If you want to learn a skill, well, then you go after books that are focused on those skills. And so there's that gap in between. Like, what else should you read? Probably stuff that increases your thinking.
Yep.
Stuff that's outside your industry, so that you expand your understanding of the world and the environment, not just stay focused on your specialty or your industry, or even just the stuff you like. Sometimes you got to break out of what you like to find something new that you can like.
Yep. Definitely. You'll always find these weird books too, right? Like that's why I buy a lot of books, is because the right book will just find its way to you at the right time too. So you might buy a book and be like, oh, this is interesting. And then when you actually come time and you crack it open, you're like, well, like this is exactly what I need right now. And it's weird how the universe works like that in some cases. It's funny you mentioned Jay Abraham, because I have his book behind me, the Mr. X book, which I've been meaning to crack open for about 1.5 years. And it's like, after I finish 2 other books, it's my next one. And then I think that after that, I'll probably read the other one you suggested right now, just because I think like he's one of the godfather of marketing and sales in general and building your business. So I think he's someone a lot of people should definitely, check out as well. So I guess you're a really busy guy. I mean, you seem you're doing a million things. But in fact, I see you actually relaxing a lot of the time in very warm climates, and I'm in Canada, so I'm super jealous. But you run a couple of different businesses. So you run Conley Strategic, and I guess you're a partner and part owner of Contractor Dynamics. So why don't you talk about Conley Strategic, first of all, and what exactly that is and how you help people?
Okay, Conley Strategic is sort of my portfolio company. I use it as the vehicle for everything else that I do. I do all my consulting inside of that. I do education inside of that, but I also use it as the vehicle for investing in other companies. One of which that I highlight is Contractor Dynamics. Because it's self-serving, right? Contractor Dynamics is an agency, and I do a lot of work with agencies. So by promoting the fact that I've invested in and own a piece of this agency, it allows me to highlight the lessons that I'm teaching in a real-world fashion, because we do them every day in our own company, right? So that's what Conley Strategic is. It's essentially a holding company.
Okay.
And I really encourage anyone else out there to start thinking about how they're going to invest in the future. Because if you're a freelancer, if you are a marketer, you got an agency, odds are you're not going to sell it. no one's going to buy it unless you get big enough that you're attractive to a strategic buyer.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to sell. And if you do sell, it's not going to be for retirement money. So what you need to do is find a way to generate a lot of revenue from your business and then reinvest it into other assets. That's what I do. And that's what Conley Strategic is really about, is to be able to have a way of investing in other assets. Contractor Dynamics does marketing and advertising and has moved into the education space, marketing education space for the construction industry, and specifically focused on roofers. And the roofer thing was accidental. It was, we were doing so much work in the construction field, and then more and more successful roofing companies started coming to us. And then we just, gave into the market. We just said, we didn't niche for roofers, right? Roofers just said, you're our boys, right? So that's who we're going to use. And now almost 100% of our clientele are successful roofing companies.
Wow. Yeah, I guess like once you niche down, like so many people they kind of start just coming to you, right? Because it's like, and it's a lot. It just makes it so much easier because you have one. It's like, well, we have results with them. Like, here's the results we have, and it just makes it easier to get those people on board. Awesome. And so I first found out about you. There was this big launch about 6 months ago. I was talking about you before the show, and it was like a big Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi interview. And there's this one guy I follow, Miles Beckler, who's awesome. I recommend checking him out as well. But he interviewed you, and I'm like, all right, like I need to have this guy. Like his ideas are super original. And I want people to be able to like find out more about you and what you do and contact you if they are curious, especially if they're a roofer. So where can people find out more about you?
Well, they can go to timconley.net, timconley.net, or where I'd really like them to go is to my YouTube channel, which is just Tim Conley, TimConley.
Awesome. What I'll do is for all the listeners, I'm going to post those links before these when I post it on whatever the podcast show, and below below my YouTube video, as well as Facebook as well, just so people can actually check out your stuff, because you have a whole compendium of videos on YouTube, and it's something I recommend everyone binge watch. Like if you're thinking of watching Netflix this weekend, just go out and watch all of Tim's videos, because they are super useful and they're addictive, and it's something where you can watch it to the end and you're going to get something new and original out of every single episode. All right. Well, I think I've taken up enough of your time today, Tim. I'm sure you're super busy. I really, really appreciate you for coming on the show. And on behalf of everyone, I just wanted to thank you before we go.
Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. I think pleasure was all mine. Really appreciate it. All right, guys. Again, check out Tim Conley on YouTube when you guys do get a chance. And to my fellow conspirators and conspirators, I will see you next time on another episode of the Underground Marketing Conspiracy. Woo!